It's a tale that has become legendary in aviation history, a landing so dramatic, so risky, and one that defied the odds, so much so that even Hollywood is thinking of making a movie out of it.
It was supposed to be a normal flight. Air Canada Flight 143 took off from Montreal on a quiet summer day in July 1983. The Boeing 767 was one of the airline's newest planes, sleek, modern, and fully computerized. Everything looked perfect. On board were 69 people, some chatting, some reading, and others dozing off, all excited to reach their destination. But less than an hour into the flight, something was terribly wrong. What no one knew was that the aircraft had been massively underfueled. The crew had no clue. The ground staff thought the job was done. No one double-checked, no one thought to ask. Then high above Manitoba, at 39,000 feet, the cockpit suddenly fell silent. Total engine failure. No thrust, no power, no warning. Just silence. The huge jetliner was now a glider, falling fast with nowhere safe to land. How could a simple mistake put so many lives at risk? What caused a brand new jet to run out of fuel in midair? And here's the big question. Could this happen again? Stick around, because what happened next is nothing short of a miracle. This is the incredible true story of Air Canada Flight 143, also known as the Gimli Glider. It was a bright and quiet summer morning on July 23, 1983, at Montreal's Trudeau International Airport. The weather was calm, the sky clear. Perfect for flying. Air Canada Flight 143 was preparing to take off, bound for Edmonton, Alberta, with a stopover in Ottawa. From there, it would continue westward to its final destination, Calgary. This was a well-traveled route, routine for both the airline and the crew. On board, there were 69 passengers, along with the flight attendants, ready to provide service and keep everyone comfortable. Passengers were excited for their trip, some heading home, others traveling for work or vacation. The plane assigned for this flight was one of Air Canada's newest and most advanced, the Boeing 767. It was a wide-body aircraft, sleek and modern, equipped with cutting-edge technology for 1983. Compared to older planes, it was quieter and more fuel-efficient, a symbol of progress in commercial aviation. Everything seemed normal. The plane looked ready, the crew prepared, and the passengers settled in. But beneath the surface, a hidden problem was already waiting to change everything. The day before the flight, on July 22, 1983, the Boeing 767 was undergoing routine checks in Edmonton. During these checks, a critical problem was discovered. The plane's fuel quantity indicator system, known as the FQIS, wasn't working properly. This system is supposed to tell pilots exactly how much fuel is in the tanks. To keep the plane flying, a technician disabled one of the faulty parts of the system and made a note of it in the aircraft's logbook. The next morning, the pilots who flew the plane to Montreal, Captain John Weir and First Officer Donald Johnson, were informed about the problem. Because the fuel system was now only working on half its normal setup, the crew took extra care. They used a manual measurement tool called a dripstick to physically measure the fuel level in the tanks. Captain Weir carefully converted these dripstick readings from centimeters to liters, then to kilograms, and it seemed to match the partially working fuel gauge. The plane flew safely to Toronto and then to Montreal without any issues. In Montreal, a new crew took over, Captain Robert Bob Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal. They were preparing for Flight 143 to Ottawa and then Edmonton. During the handover, Weir warned Pearson about the fuel gauge problem. Pearson decided to load enough fuel to fly the whole trip without refueling in Ottawa, a smart move, considering the faulty gauge. But here's where things started to go wrong. While the plane waited for fuel, an avionics technician briefly entered the cockpit, checked the logbook, and re-enabled the faulty fuel gauge channel. He ran a test which the system failed, but distracted by the fuel truck's arrival, he forgot to disable the faulty channel again. Later, when Pearson came back into the cockpit, the fuel gauge was blank as he expected. But unknown to him, the system was now confused. Here's the key point. The Boeing 767 was one of the first all-metric aircraft in Air Canada's fleet, meaning it measured fuel in kilograms, not pounds. Pearson measured the fuel manually again using the dripstick, but in converting the fuel measurements, he accidentally used the wrong density figure, one meant for pounds per liter, not kilograms per liter. This small math mistake meant the fuel calculation was wrong by almost half. Believing the plane had enough fuel, Pearson entered this incorrect number into the flight computer. The plane took off, completely unaware it was severely underfueled. No one thought to double-check. No alarms went off. Just over halfway through the flight, something terrifying started to happen. At 39,000 feet, while flying over Red Lake, Ontario, the cockpit warning system suddenly sounded an alarm. It was a fuel pressure problem, first on the left engine. The pilots thought maybe a fuel pump had failed and turned off the alarm, knowing the engine could still get fuel by gravity if the plane kept flying level. But then just seconds later, the alarm sounded for the right engine too. That's when everything changed. The pilots immediately decided to divert to Winnipeg, hoping to land safely. Then, almost unbelievably, the left engine failed. It was dead. They prepared for a single-engine landing. But moments later, the cockpit sounded a terrifying new alarm, an all engines out warning, a sharp bong sound none of the crew had ever heard before. And then the right engine stopped too. The plane lost all power. Both engines were out. The massive Boeing 767 was now a giant glider, silently falling through the sky. Without engines, the plane's electronic flight instruments went dark. Only a few basic backup instruments remained, but crucially, the vertical speed indicator was missing, so the pilots couldn't easily tell how far the plane could glide. Even the hydraulic systems, which moved the plane's large control surfaces, depended on engine power. But the plane had one last hope, a small device called the ram air turbine. It dropped down from under the plane, spinning in the air to power the hydraulics enough to control the aircraft. With both engines dead, the pilots knew they had only one chance to glide the huge plane safely to the ground. First Officer Maurice Quintal suggested landing at Gimli, a nearby old air base he knew well from his time in the Air Force. But what nobody knew was that part of this old airfield was no longer used for planes. It had been turned into a racetrack with cars, campers, and even a sports car race happening right on the runway. As the plane got closer, Captain Bob Pearson carefully tried to control the giant jet, now flying like a glider. But it was not easy. Without engine power, many important systems were gone. They couldn't extend the flaps, which helped slow the plane down and make landing safer. The plane was coming in too fast and too high. Usually, pilots could make a wide turn to lose speed and altitude, but this time they didn't have enough height for that. So Pearson did something unusual, a trick called a forward slip. By turning the plane's controls in opposite directions, he created extra drag, which helped the plane drop faster without picking up speed. This trick is common in small gliders, but almost never done in big jets. It was risky, but it worked. As the plane touched down, the pilots had one more problem. The nose wheel did not lock properly when lowered. It collapsed under the weight and scraped along the runway. At first, this seemed bad, but it actually helped slow the plane down even more. The friction from the dragging nose helped reduce speed. Also, the main wheels hit a metal guardrail running down the middle of the runway, part of the racetrack setup. Instead of causing a crash, the plane's wheels rode along the guardrail, keeping it on course and preventing it from sliding off into the crowd. Captain Pearson applied the brakes hard. Some tires blew out during the skidding, but finally, after a tense and long glide, the plane came to a complete stop. Despite the dangers, no one was seriously hurt. A small fire broke out near the nose, but was quickly put out by race workers on the ground. Passengers evacuated safely, helped by emergency slides. The nose being so low made the rear exit higher than normal, causing a few minor injuries, but nothing life-threatening. That incredible landing at Gimli earned Air Canada Flight 143 the unforgettable nickname, the Gimli Glider. So what exactly went wrong? And how did a simple mix-up nearly turn into one of the deadliest accidents in aviation history? After the amazing landing, a full investigation was launched by the Aviation Safety Board of Canada. the group that later became the Transportation Safety Board. Their report gave credit where it was due, praising the pilots and crew for their professionalism and quick thinking that saved everyone on board. But it also pointed out serious problems behind the scenes. The investigation found that Air Canada's management was responsible for several mistakes and equipment issues that made the accident possible. One big problem was that no one at Air Canada had clearly assigned the job of checking the fuel load in this unusual situation. Older planes had a flight engineer who handled this, but the newer Boeing 767 flew with just 2 pilots, and Air Canada never reassigned that task properly. The safety board also said the airline needed to keep more spare parts, especially for the fuel system, and train their pilots and ground crew better on the metric system, since the Boeing 767 was one of the first Air Canada planes to use metric measurements. And the Boeing 767 had a system called the Fuel Quantity Indication System, FQIS, which measured how much fuel was in the tanks and showed that information to the pilots. The system had 2 separate computers to check the fuel independently if one failed. The other could still work, but pilots had to check the fuel manually using a dripstick before flying. In this plane's case, the FQIS was faulty. The day before the flight, a technician found one channel of the system was broken, so he disabled it and noted this in the maintenance log. This left the plane relying on just one channel of the system. When the new crew took over for Flight 143, they were told about the FQIS problem. Meanwhile, another technician tried to test the system and accidentally turned the broken channel back on. This caused the fuel gauges in the cockpit to go blank. The technician had to leave before he could fix it again, so the faulty system stayed turned on, leaving the pilots with no fuel readings at all. Because the fuel system wasn't working properly, the pilots and technicians had to calculate the fuel load by hand using the dripstick measurements. But here, another mistake happened. The Boeing 767 measured fuel in kilograms, but the team accidentally used the wrong numbers when converting liters of fuel to kilograms. This led to them loading much less fuel than needed. At every stop, the fuel checks were done incorrectly. No one realized how little fuel was actually on board. And since the plane appeared to have enough fuel, no extra fuel was added in Ottawa on the way to Edmonton. The Gimli Glider's story shows just how quick thinking and skill can save the day. What do you think you'd do if you were in that cockpit? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. If you're into crazy true stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.